Here I'm going to take a little walk around the outside of Fort Vaux. That's the far right side casemate as I filmed it from the front, just to give an idea of the moat part of these forts. This isn't specifically caused by shell fire, this part, but you can see it's getting dark, but you can see how much artillery hit the side of the fort. But they're very much built as castles, just that they're underground instead of above ground, which makes sense as cannons became prominent in Europe. The idea of a castle wall was no longer relevant technology-wise, and so the first castles that were assaulted by cannons were quickly defeated. But the idea of a fortified position still made sense, and so these forts started to go underground, only exposing as little as possible above ground. And to take a position like this, you could have a couple ways of doing that. You could surround it and starve the garrison out, called siege. But that would be difficult because this was a network of fortresses, and so even if you surrounded one, it could potentially receive support from others. And also the fortresses were well equipped with food and water, enough to stand up for months, too far to break a siege. The other way would be to crush it with artillery, which the Germans tried to do and succeeded in many places. And the third way was by direct assault. And that still means that you had to come at this thing on foot in 1915 or 16. There were no tanks. Soldiers were still riding horses. And although weapon technology had come exceedingly far since the American Civil War, just like today, if you want to take ground, then infantrymen have to advance across it. And so to come through an area like this on foot and have to go down into this ditch and then up that slope, which is 40 or 50 feet up, while being machine gunned from these windows in both directions covering this area, was nearly impossible. And you could probably fill this with water and wire as well, whatever. Looking at these ruins now, as they really are, of these fortresses, it's important to remember that these were the equivalent of the French national defense strategy. We use our navy and nuclear weapons and things like that to assure our defense now, plus the strength of our army. But the French invested their money into these fortress systems, probably for a little too long, as the Second World War showed. But in World War I, this was still effective. And these fortresses are very similar to what you see in the Pacific Northwest for those of us from there that go to visit these coastal batteries. They were built in the same era, and in many cases, even the same people built these forts. The difference here is that these forts were actually tested by the most horrific and ruthless of battles. And the ones at home are just basically derelict, but they were never crushed with artillery like these ones were. Both are fascinating to walk around. It's snowy and icy right now. The Battle of Verdun began in February 1916 and went for 9 months. And so it was fought in both winter and summer. But just like before, right there is a rotating cannon turret with quick firing guns and then a casemate. And you can see I'm walking the perimeter of the fort. What you see now are these concrete structures, but the French army wouldn't have just relied on nothing but the fortress itself, because really every square yard of the hills around here were also covered in trenches and covered by small bunkers and barbed wire, just individual fighting positions. And so this was just a node in a network of defenses that covered the whole area in every direction. And so if you even made it up to one of these to attack it, you probably already would have had to have fought through terrible trench warfare to even get close to it. So these represented bastions in that kind of fighting. I'm rounding the corner now back to the front of the fort. This one was attacked in force by the Germans to try and exploit their success at Douaumont and was eventually taken. The garrison inside fought to the death virtually, but this is just one of several like it, and most of them were retaken by the end of the war anyway, by 1917. What happened here at Verdun is that the German army set out to inflict casualties on France in an area of strategic importance to France. There's some argument about whether they meant to take the city of Verdun per se, or just create an area where they could funnel French soldiers into a killing field and just bleed France that way and kind of win by attrition. Usually armies try to take objectives, but nonetheless, millions of soldiers fought in this area on both sides. There's the casemates. I stood inside those rooms. So the video I took inside Fort Vaux, I'm standing behind those guns. But nonetheless, this is so serene now, but you have to imagine this area just incredibly active during the battle, with not just the fire from the battle, but with just the activity of men everywhere, digging and fighting, cooking, relieving casualties, reinforcing themselves. All the work that actually goes into war that you don't really see that much of. And all of that occurred here at a place like Fort Vaux. And here I come back up to the front of the fort. I think the nice office lady who let us in is getting ready to go home, but gives you an idea what this place looked like. Just a lump in the ground, but so formidable when the most advanced weapon is machine gun fire and artillery. And you have to come across this ground on foot. It's murderous. The two forts that I visited today, they both have cemeteries inside the fort where the soldiers who died actually are still there. And even though the fort is fairly intact inside, it's clear that damage was still inflicted on the insides of the forts throughout the battle. And so they weren't completely safe to be in, but better than in the open.